The sun sank like a bloodshot eye beyond the rolling plains as Reese Everett rode into Dodge City, Kansas, his weathered face a map of hard years and harder miles. He knew before his stallion's hooves hit the main street that his welcome would be as cold as a grave at midnight. Word traveled faster than bullets in these parts. It was May of 1878, and the cattle season was just beginning to swell the town with drovers, gamblers, and those who preyed upon both. Reese had been avoiding Dodge for nearly 2 years, but circumstances had forced his hand. A man could outrun many things: the law, creditors, even his own conscience at times, but eventually, the road always circled back. The first whispers reached him before he'd even dismounted. "Everett's back," someone hissed from the shadowed boardwalk. Another voice spat his name like it was poison. Reese kept his face impassive, his right hand casually close to his holster. The Dodge house stood at the end of Front Street, and he guided his horse toward it, ignoring the stares that followed him like vultures tracking dying prey. The late spring air was thick with dust and tension. "Well, look what the wind blew in," drawled the desk clerk when Reese entered the hotel. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're either brave or stupid, Everett." "Just need a room," Reese replied, placing coins on the counter, "and maybe some information." "Information costs more than lodging in your case." The clerk reluctantly pushed a key across the scarred wood. "Room 6, and a piece of free advice. Marshall Masterson's out of town till tomorrow. Might want to be gone by then." Reese nodded, taking the key. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him regardless. He'd come to Dodge for a specific purpose: to find the person who'd sent him that cryptic letter signed only with the initials BJ. After settling his horse at the livery, Reese made his way to the Long Branch Saloon. If he wanted to hear the town gossip, there was no better place. The batwing doors swung open at his touch and the piano music faltered. Conversations died. Heads turned. "Reese Everett," someone muttered from a corner table. "Damn his soul." Reese ignored the comment, striding to the bar with deliberate casualness. The bartender, a new man since Reese had last been in town, regarded him warily. "Whiskey," Reese said, placing a coin on the polished surface. The bartender hesitated only a moment before pouring the drink. "You stirring up quite the hornet's nest just by showing your face, mister. Seems that way." Reese tossed back the whiskey. "Mind telling me why?" the bartender snorted. "Like you don't know, after what happened with the Jenkins girl." Reese's expression didn't change, but something cold slithered down his spine. The Jenkins girl, that had to be connected to the letter. "I'd like to speak with her," Reese said quietly. The bartender's laugh was sharp. "Good luck with that. Doctor's office is down the street, but her pa's not likely to let you within shooting distance." Reese ordered another drink, scanning the room. Most patrons were avoiding his gaze now, conversation resuming in muted tones. All except one woman, sitting alone at a table near the back, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was unsettling. She wasn't dressed like a saloon girl. Her simple blue dress and neatly pinned brown hair marked her as respectable, which made her presence here unusual. When she realized he'd noticed her attention, she didn't look away. Instead, she inclined her head slightly toward the empty chair across from her. Intrigued, Reese carried his drink over. "Mind if I join you, madam?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Mr. Everett," she replied, her voice cultured but with a thread of steel running through it. "I've been waiting for you." Reese sat, studying her. She was perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes and a stubborn set to her jaw. Pretty, but not in the flashy way of dance hall girls. Hers was a quieter beauty that improved with each passing moment. "You have me at a disadvantage," he said. "Beatrice Jennings," she replied, "though most call me B." The initials matched the letter. Reese felt the weight of the folded paper in his vest pocket. "Your letter was vague, Miss Jennings. It had to be." She glanced around the saloon. "This isn't the place to discuss it. Meet me tomorrow at dawn by the old cottonwood east of town." That's a lot to ask of a man who's being cursed by half the town for reasons unknown to him. Her lips tightened. "The reasons aren't unknown to you, Mr. Everett, whatever you might claim, but I believe there's more to the story than what people say." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "They curse your name here, Mr. Everett. I've heard it more times than I can count. And that interests you because," her eyes, clear and determined, met his, "because I plan to bless it every day if what I suspect is true." Before Reese could respond, the saloon doors banged open. A burly man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest stomped in, his hand resting on his gun. Not Masterson, but one of his deputies. "Everett," he bellowed. "I heard you were back." B stood quickly. "I need to go. Dawn, Mr. Everett, don't be late." She slipped away through a side door as the deputy approached. Reese turned to face the lawman, keeping his hands visible on the table. "Evening, deputy. Something I can help you with. You can help by getting back on your horse and riding out of Dodge, tonight." The deputy's face was flushed with anger. "Marshall's not here, but I got authority enough to run you out." "On what charge?" Reese kept his voice level. "Don't need a charge. Not for the likes of you." The deputy spat on the floor. "Jenkins wants your hide and half the town would help him get it. Only reason you're still breathing is most folks think you ain't worth stretching rope for. I've broken no laws in Dodge City." "That's debatable." The deputy leaned closer. "But what ain't debatable is this: you're leaving town by first light, or I'm throwing you in a cell for your own protection. And I might just lose the key." Reese considered his options. The deputy wasn't bluffing, and a night in jail would mean missing his meeting with Beatrice Jennings. "I'll be gone by noon tomorrow," Reese said finally. The deputy straightened. "Dawn would be healthier." "Noon," Reese repeated firmly. "I have business to conclude first." They stared at each other for a long moment before the deputy nodded curtly. "Noon, then. But if I see your face after that, all bets are off." After the deputy left, Reese returned to his room at the Dodge house, his mind churning. The Jenkins girl. That had to be Belinda Jenkins, daughter of one of the wealthiest ranchers in Ford County. 2 years ago, she'd gone missing for 3 days. When she'd returned, she'd claimed Reese had kidnapped her. It was a lie. Reese had found her half dead on the prairie and brought her to safety, nothing more. But Calvin Jenkins had powerful friends, and Reese had enemies enough already. Rather than face a hangman's noose, he'd fled Kansas. Now he was back, drawn by a mysterious letter from a woman he'd never met, who claimed she would bless his name when others cursed it. It made no sense, yet something in Beatrice Jennings' eyes had convinced him to hear her out. Dawn found Reese already waiting by the old cottonwood tree east of town. The massive tree stood alone on a small rise, its branches spreading like protective arms over the surrounding grass. In the distance, Dodge City was just beginning to stir. He didn't have to wait long. Beatrice arrived on a chestnut mare, her riding habit practical but well-made. She dismounted gracefully and approached him without fear. "You came," she said, sounding slightly surprised. "Your letter was compelling." Reese removed it from his pocket, though cryptic. Bea nodded, her expression serious. "I had to be careful. There are people in Dodge who wouldn't want us speaking." "Why is that, Miss Jennings? And what's your connection to Belinda Jenkins?" "She's my cousin," Bea replied. "And the reason I sought you out." She hesitated. "Mr. Everett, I believe you're innocent of what they accused you of." Reese's expression remained impassive. "What changed your mind?" "Belinda did." Bea began walking alongside the tree, and Reese fell in step beside her. "She's been troubled since she returned. At first, we all believed her story, but things didn't add up. And then 6 months ago, during a fever, she said something that made me question everything. What did she say? She called out for someone named Fletcher, said he was coming back for her. Bea turned to face him. There was no Fletcher in her story about you, but there was a ranch hand at her father's place, Fletcher Wilson, who disappeared around the same time she went missing. Reese processed this. You think Wilson was involved in her disappearance? I think he was responsible for it. And I think you may have saved her life. Bea's eyes searched his. Am I right? For the first time in 2 years, Reese felt the weight of suspicion lift slightly from his shoulders. I found her near the Arkansas River. She'd been beaten badly. I brought her to the doctor in Spearville because it was closer than Dodge. Never knew who hurt her. She was unconscious most of the time. Why didn't you stay to explain? Because Calvin Jenkins arrived with a posse before she woke up. One look at me and he drew his gun. I barely made it out alive. Reese's jaw tightened at the memory. By the time I heard she'd accused me, I was halfway to Colorado. Bea nodded slowly. Fletcher Wilson returned to the Jenkins ranch last week. He's been promoted to foreman. And you think that's significant? I know it is. My cousin is terrified of him, though she pretends otherwise. Bea's hands twisted together. Something happened between them, something she's too frightened to reveal. Why come to me? Reese asked. Why not take your suspicions to the law, because Wilson is Calvin Jenkins' right-hand man now? And Jenkins has half the county in his pocket, including parts of the law. Her voice dropped. And because Belinda isn't the only girl who's gone missing around here. There have been others, working girls, mostly. No one important enough for anyone to look too hard. The implications sent a chill through Reese. You're suggesting Wilson is responsible for those disappearances too? I don't know. But something is wrong, Mr. Everett, and you're the only person who might help me uncover the truth. Her eyes were pleading now. Will you help me clear your name and possibly save my cousin from whatever threat still hangs over her? Reese was silent for a long moment. Getting involved meant risking his life again. The deputy's warning echoed in his mind. The law here has made it clear I'm not welcome, he said finally. And Jenkins would shoot me on sight. Then we'll have to be careful. Bea stepped closer. Mr. Everett, I know I'm asking a lot, but if I'm right, you're the only one who can help Belinda, and the only one who might stop whatever Wilson is involved in before another girl disappears. The sun was climbing higher, painting the plains in golden light. In a few hours, he was supposed to be riding out of Dodge City. Tell me everything you know, he said at last, and then we'll decide how to proceed. Relief flooded Bea's face. Thank you. She reached out impulsively and touched his arm. They curse your name in town, Mr. Everett, but I meant what I said. If you help us, I'll bless it every day of my life. The sincerity in her voice stirred something in Reese that he'd thought long buried hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to clear his name after all. Start at the beginning, he said, and don't leave anything out. For the next hour, they sat beneath the cottonwoods spreading branches while Bea explained everything she knew. Fletcher Wilson had come to work for Calvin Jenkins 3 years ago. Charming and hardworking, he'd quickly become a favorite. Belinda, then 19, had seemed taken with him despite her father's disapproval of any romance between his daughter and a hired hand. Then suddenly, Belinda began avoiding him, Bea continued. She wouldn't say why, but I could tell something had happened. A month later, she disappeared. When she returned after you found her, she was changed, withdrawn, frightened of shadows. And she accused me immediately, Reese asked. Bea hesitated. Not immediately, no. It was after her father had some private time with her at the doctor's. When she emerged, she had your name on her lips. Reese's expression darkened. Jenkins coached her. I believe so, and I think she was too frightened to contradict him. Bea plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. A week after she returned, Wilson left the ranch. Jenkins said he'd fired him for drunkenness, but it seemed convenient until he returned last week. Yes, and now Belinda hardly leaves the house. She jumps at every sound. Bea looked up, her eyes troubled. Yesterday, I overheard Wilson tell her, "Remember our agreement." She was white as a sheet afterward. Reese considered this information. Where does Belinda stand with you investigating this? She doesn't know. We were close once, but she's pushed everyone away since the incident. Bea's voice cracked slightly. I'm afraid for her, Mr. Everett, and for others if Wilson is who I suspect he is. You're taking a risk just talking to me, Reese pointed out. If Jenkins found out. Some risks are worth taking. Bea met his gaze steadily. Especially when lives are at stake. The conviction in her voice impressed him. Most women of her apparent standing would avoid scandal at all costs, yet here she was, risking her reputation and possibly her safety. We need proof, Reese said finally. Something concrete that links Wilson to what happened to your cousin. Without it, it's just speculation. I thought perhaps if we could get Belinda alone, away from her father and Wilson's influence, she might tell the truth. That won't be easy. Jenkins guards her like a prized heifer. There's a social at the church this Friday evening. The entire town will be there, including the Jenkins family. Belinda always steps outside for air during these events. She doesn't like crowds since. Bea trailed off. Since she was attacked, Reese finished for her. You think we could approach her then? It's our best opportunity. But you can't show your face in town, not with that deputy watching for you. Reese nodded slowly, forming a plan. I'll leave Dodge as promised visibly. Then circle back after dark. There's an abandoned line shack about 3 miles south of town where I can lay low until Friday. I'll bring you supplies, Bea offered. Too dangerous. If you're seen visiting that shack, people will talk. People already talk about me, Mr. Everett. I'm 26 and unmarried in a town where most girls wed by 18. I'm considered peculiar at best. A small, wry smile touched her lips. Besides, I often ride out to sketch the landscape. No one will think twice about it. Reese studied her with new interest. There was steel beneath her proper exterior. All right, he agreed, but we need to be careful. If Wilson is as dangerous as you believe, he won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens him. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Reese's hand moved to his gun, but Bea touched his arm, stopping him. It's just a freight wagon, she said as it came into view on the distant road. But we should part ways. I'll find you at the line shack tomorrow. Reese nodded. Be careful, Miss Jennings. Trust no one. She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her face. I'm trusting you, Mr. Everett, and please call me Bea. Then I'm Reese, he replied, surprised at how easily the offer of familiarity came. She mounted her mare gracefully. Until tomorrow, Reese. As she rode away, Reese watched her straight-backed figure grow smaller against the Kansas sky. For the first time in 2 years, he felt something besides bitterness and resignation. Whether it was the prospect of clearing his name or the unexpected alliance with Beatrice Jennings, he couldn't say. But it felt remarkably like purpose. He rode back to Dodge City and made a show of checking out of the hotel. The deputy watched with satisfaction as Reese mounted his stallion and headed west out of town around 11 that morning. What the lawman didn't see was Reese circling back after nightfall, using the cover of darkness to make his way to the abandoned line shack south of town. The shack was in better condition than Reese had expected. Though dusty and sparse, its roof was intact and the walls solid. He settled his horse in the small attached lean-to and made himself as comfortable as possible inside, using his saddle as a pillow. Tomorrow, B would bring supplies, and they would refine their plan. As he drifted toward sleep, Reese found himself wondering about Beatrice Jennings. She was unlike any woman he'd encountered in his travels, educated, independent, and unafraid to pursue what she believed right. In another life, under different circumstances, she might be someone he'd court properly, but such thoughts were foolish. Even if they cleared his name, a man like him, a drifter with more enemies than friends, had no business dreaming of a future with a woman like her. Still, as sleep claimed him, her words echoed in his mind. "Then I'll bless it every day." A strange comfort in a world that had shown him little kindness. True to her word, Bea arrived at the line shack the following afternoon. Reese watched her approach through a crack in the shuttered window, alert for any sign she'd been followed. But she rode alone, a canvas satchel hanging from her saddle. "You made it safely," she said when he opened the door, her relief evident. "No trouble," Reese replied, taking the reins of her horse. "Though I doubt the deputy's convinced I've truly gone." Inside, Bea unpacked the supplies she'd brought: bread, dried beef, coffee, and surprisingly a bottle of decent whiskey. "Medicinal purposes," she explained with a hint of mischief when she caught his raised eyebrow. "Of course," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Very medicinal." While Reese prepared coffee over the small fire he'd built in the shack's stone hearth, Bea spread a map of the county on the rickety table. "The Jenkins Ranch is here," she said, pointing to a location about 10 miles east of Dodge. "Belinda rarely leaves it except for church and social functions. The event Friday will be our best chance to speak with her." "What about Wilson?" Reese asked. "Will he be there?" "Almost certainly. He shadows her whenever she's in public now." Reese considered this complication. "We'll need a distraction. I have a friend, Ruth Adler, who works at the millinery shop. She's sweet on one of the cowboys who works for Jenkins. She might be willing to distract Wilson for a few minutes." "Is she trustworthy?" Bea nodded. "Completely. And she's concerned about Belinda too. Everyone has noticed the change in her." They spent the afternoon refining their plan. Reese would attend the social dressed as a drummer, a traveling salesman with a false beard and spectacles. Bea had brought these disguise items, explaining that they came from a box of theatrical costumes used for the town's occasional amateur productions. "You've thought of everything," Reese remarked, impressed by her thoroughness. "I've had months to consider this," she replied. "Ever since Belinda's fever revelation about Fletcher." As the day waned, their conversation drifted from planning to more personal matters. Reese learned that Bea had come to Dodge City 3 years ago after the death of her parents in St. Louis. She lived with her Uncle Calvin Jenkins' brother, who owned the town's only bookshop. "I help run the store," she explained. "It gives me a small income and a good deal of freedom. My uncle is often traveling to purchase inventory. And no suitors clamoring for your attention." Reese asked, then immediately regretted the overly personal question, but Bea merely smiled. "A few over the years, none that interested me enough to consider giving up my independence." "A rare perspective," Reese observed. "Perhaps. But I've seen too many women trapped in marriages without love or respect. I'd rather remain alone than suffer such a fate." She glanced at him curiously. "And you, no wife waiting somewhere?" "No," he said simply. "My life doesn't lend itself to permanence." A comfortable silence fell between them as the sun set, painting the shack's interior in golden hues. Reese found himself studying Bea's profile as she gazed out the small window, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the single tendril of brown hair that had escaped her neat bun. She turned suddenly, catching him watching her, but neither looked away. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. The moment was broken by the distant howl of a coyote. Bee started, glancing outside at the gathering darkness. "I should return to town before it's fully dark," she said, rising. "I'll come again tomorrow with more information about the social." Reese nodded, walking her to her horse. "Be careful. If Wilson is as dangerous as we suspect, he might notice your interest in Belinda's welfare." "I'll be discreet," she promised, mounting her mare. "Until tomorrow, Reese." He watched her ride away, a curious tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with their dangerous undertaking and everything to do with the woman herself. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Bee would visit the shack in the afternoon, bringing supplies and information. They refined their plan for the social, discussed contingencies, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, grew closer. Reese found himself sharing stories of his travels across the frontier, that he'd never told another soul: the beauty of Montana's mountains, the harsh majesty of the Arizona desert, the vibrant chaos of New Orleans. In turn, Bee spoke of her childhood in St. Louis, her passion for literature, and her secret dream to someday write novels of her own. "Adventure stories, mostly," she admitted with a self-conscious laugh. "Though everyone says women should write domestic tales or romances." "You don't strike me as someone who does what everyone says," Reese observed. Her smile was worth the 3 years of hardship he'd endured. "No, I suppose I don't." By the day of the social, a tension had developed between them that had nothing to do with their plan and everything to do with the connection growing stronger with each conversation. Neither acknowledged it directly, but it hummed in the air like distant thunder. "Are you certain about tonight?" Reese asked as Bee helped him adjust his disguise late Friday afternoon. "Once we confront Belinda, there's no turning back." Her fingers stilled on his collar. "I've never been more certain of anything. My cousin deserves justice, and so do you." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment Reese thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, adjusting the false spectacles on his nose. "How do I look?" "Like a completely different man," she replied softly. "No one will recognize you." The church social was well underway by the time they arrived separately, as planned. Reese entered first, carrying a small sample case to support his drummer disguise. The church hall was decorated with spring flowers, and nearly everyone in Dodge City seemed to be in attendance. A small band played in one corner while couples danced in the center of the room. Tables laden with food lined one wall. Reese spotted Calvin Jenkins, immediately a burly man with a florid face and an ostentatious watch chain stretched across his vest. Beside him stood a pale young woman who could only be Belinda. Though pretty, with blonde hair and delicate features, she had a haunted look about her eyes that made her appear older than her 21 years. And hovering nearby, watching her with the intensity of a hawk tracking a rabbit, was a tall man with sandy hair and a thin mustache. Fletcher Wilson. Even from across the room, there was something unsettling about his gaze. Reese circulated slowly through the crowd, maintaining his salesman persona, offering card tricks to amused attendees while keeping Jenkins and his daughter in his peripheral vision. When Bee arrived 30 minutes later, looking striking in a green dress that complemented her brown hair, he pretended not to notice her. Their plan was set in motion when Ruth Adler, a pretty, vivacious blonde whom Bee had pointed out to Reese earlier, approached Wilson with a flirtatious smile and a glass of punch. Simultaneously, Bee made her way to Belinda's side, greeting her cousin warmly. Reese watched as the two women conversed briefly before Bee led Belinda toward the side door that opened onto a small garden. Wilson noticed and started to follow, but Ruth cleverly spilled her punch on his sleeve, requiring immediate attention. Taking his cue, Reese slipped out a different door and circled around to the garden. In the deepening twilight, he could see Bea and Belinda sitting on a stone bench beneath a flowering apple tree. Belinda appeared agitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Reese approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. Bea saw him first and nodded almost imperceptibly. "Belinda," she said gently, "there's someone who needs to speak with you." Belinda looked up, her eyes widening in confusion as she took in the bearded stranger approaching them. "Who?" Reese removed the false spectacles. "Miss Jenkins," he said softly, "you may not recognize me, but we've met before." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by terror. She leapt to her feet. "No, stay away from me. Belinda, please." Bea caught her cousin's hand. "Mr. Everett isn't here to hurt you. He wants to help." "Help?" Belinda's voice rose hysterically. "He kidnapped me." No," Reese said firmly. "I found you by the Arkansas River. You'd been beaten severely. I took you to a doctor in Spearville, nothing more." Belinda's face drained of color. She swayed slightly and Bea steadied her, guiding her back to the bench. "It's true, isn't it?" Bea pressed gently. "Mr. Everett didn't hurt you. It was Fletcher Wilson." Tears welled in Belinda's eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't know what he's capable of." "Then tell us," Reese said, crouching down to meet her eyes. "Tell us what really happened, Miss Jenkins." The garden was quiet except for the distant sounds of music and laughter from the church hall. Belinda looked from Reese to Bea, her expression one of trapped desperation. "He'll kill me," she whispered. "He'll kill my father." "We won't let that happen," Bea promised, squeezing her cousin's hand. "But other girls might be in danger if Wilson isn't stopped. Girls like Molly Carson." Belinda's head snapped up. "Molly, what about her?" "She disappeared 3 days ago," Bea said softly, "just like the others." A sob escaped Belinda's throat. "It's happening again, just like he said it would." "What did Wilson do to you?" Reese asked, his voice gentle but insistent. Belinda closed her eyes, tears tracking down her pale cheeks. When she spoke, it was barely audible. "I rejected his advances. He'd been pursuing me for months. When I finally told him I wasn't interested, he changed, became threatening, said I'd regret it." She drew a shaky breath. "One day I was riding alone, something I'd done 100 times before. He was waiting for me near the river. He dragged me from my horse, beat me, said he'd teach me not to reject him." Her voice broke. "He kept me in a cabin for days, did things to me. Said he'd done it before to girls who thought they were too good for him. Then he told me he was going to kill me, make it look like an accident." Reese's jaw tightened. "How did you escape?" "He got drunk the 3rd night, left me tied up while he passed out. I managed to free myself and run." Belinda looked at Reese, recognition truly dawning. "You found me. I remember now. You wrapped me in your coat, put me on your horse." "Why accuse me?" Reese asked, though he suspected the answer. "Father," she whispered. "When he came to the doctors, he was convinced you'd hurt me. Said everyone knew what kind of man you were, that if I didn't confirm it, my reputation would be ruined forever. No one would believe Fletcher had done it. He was too well liked, too respected on the ranch." She covered her face with her hands. "I was weak, frightened. I let Father put the words in my mouth." "And Wilson," Bea prompted gently. "He left town." Belinda nodded miserably. "Father paid him off to go away quietly, to protect my reputation," he said. "But Wilson came back last week, threatening to tell everyone what really happened, making it sound like I'd welcomed his attentions and then cried assault. He wants money, more than before." "And you think he's responsible for the other missing girls?" Reese asked. "I know he is," Belinda whispered. "He bragged about it, said they were practice, that no one cared about a few missing prostitutes and dance hall girls." The implications were sickening. Reese and Bea exchanged a grim look over Belinda's bowed head. "Belinda," Bea said firmly, "you need to tell the truth. To the marshal. To everyone. I can't, panic flared in Belinda's eyes. Fletcher said if I ever told anyone, he'd kill father first, then me. He has friends, dangerous men who would help him. We'll protect you, Reese promised. But we need evidence against Wilson, something concrete. Belinda hesitated, then reached into her dress pocket and withdrew a small key. He gave me this, said it was a reminder that he could come for me anytime. It opens a cabin near Ford's Crossing where he held me. Her voice dropped. Where I think he's taken the others. The garden door suddenly swung open, spilling light across the grass. Fletcher Wilson stood silhouetted in the doorway. Belinda, he called, his voice deceptively pleasant. Your father's looking for you. Reese moved quickly, positioning himself in the shadows behind the apple tree. Belinda hurriedly pressed the key into Bee's hand. Coming, Fletcher, she called, her voice remarkably steady despite her trembling hands. She gave Bee a desperate look. Help me, she whispered before walking toward Wilson. What were you and your cousin discussing so intently? Wilson asked as Belinda reached him, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of suspicion. Just family matters, Bee replied smoothly, following her cousin. My uncle in St. Louis is ill. Wilson's eyes narrowed as he scanned the garden, clearly sensing something amiss. For a moment, his gaze seemed to fix on the shadows where Reese stood motionless. But after a tense second, he turned away, placing a possessive hand on Belinda's back as he guided both women inside. Reese waited until they were gone before slipping out of the garden. They now had what they needed: Belinda's testimony and the key to Wilson's cabin. But getting to Ford's Crossing, finding evidence, and returning before Wilson realized what they were doing would be challenging. He made his way back to the lined shack to wait for Bee, removing his disguise and pacing the small space anxiously. It was nearly midnight when she finally arrived, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and fear. I couldn't get away earlier, she explained breathlessly as she dismounted. Wilson was watching me like a hawk. I had to wait until the social ended and everyone had gone home. Inside, she collapsed onto the room's single chair, her hands shaking slightly. He suspects something, the way he looked at me when I left Belinda. Did you get away clean? Reese asked, concerned. I think so. I made a show of heading toward my uncle's house before doubling back once I was out of sight of the church. She withdrew the small key from her reticule. Ford's Crossing is about 15 miles north of here. If we leave at first light, we could reach the cabin by mid-morning. Reese nodded, already thinking through the logistics. We'll need to be careful if Wilson has friends watching the place. Do you think that's likely? I don't know. But a man who's kidnapped and murdered multiple women won't have left his hideout completely unguarded. Bee's expression was determined. We have to try, for Belinda, for all of them. Reese studied her face in the lamplight. Most women, most people would have backed away from such danger. But Beatrice Jennings wasn't most people. You should stay here tomorrow, he said, knowing even as he spoke that she would refuse. Let me check the cabin alone. As expected, she shook her head firmly. We're in this together, Reese. Besides, 2 sets of eyes will find evidence faster than one. He couldn't argue with her logic, though every instinct urged him to keep her safe. All right, but you follow my lead, and if there's any sign of trouble, we retreat immediately. Agreed. She smiled tiredly. I should head back before I'm missed. Stay, Reese said impulsively. It's late, and the ride back to town is dangerous at night. Bee hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. My reputation will survive one night of presumed scandal better than you might survive a broken neck if your horse stumbles in the dark, Reese finished for her. I'll sleep outside with the horses. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. You're right. Thank you. Reese gathered his bedroll and stepped outside, leaving Bee the relative comfort of the shack. As he settled beneath the lean-to's roof, Listening to the night sounds of the prairie, he found himself thinking of the woman inside. In just a few days, she'd upended his solitary existence, given him purpose beyond mere survival. And tomorrow, they would risk everything to bring a dangerous man to justice. Reese had faced death before without flinching, but now, with Bee involved, fear crept into his heart. Not for himself, but for her. Dawn came with a soft pink glow that belied the gravity of their mission. They set out early, riding north toward Ford's Crossing. Bee had changed into a split-riding skirt that allowed her to ride astride, her hair braided simply down her back. She looked determined and, Reese couldn't help noticing, strikingly beautiful in the morning light. They spoke little as they rode, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The landscape rolled by endless prairie broken occasionally by copses of trees along creek beds. By mid-morning they reached Ford's Crossing, a small settlement consisting of little more than a trading post, a smithy, and a handful of scattered homesteads. "The cabin should be northeast of here," Bee said, consulting a rough map she'd drawn based on Belinda's description. "Near a stand of cottonwoods by a small creek." They skirted the settlement, not wanting to attract attention, and continued another 3 miles before spotting the cottonwoods in the distance. As they approached, a small, weathered cabin came into view, partially hidden among the trees. Reese signaled for them to dismount and tether their horses in a protected hollow some distance away. "We'll approach on foot," he said quietly. "Less chance of being seen." They crept forward cautiously, using the trees for cover. The cabin appeared deserted, no smoke from the chimney, no horse in the crude corral behind it. Still, Reese drew his revolver before motioning for Bee to stay back as he circled the structure, checking for any sign of occupation. Finding none, he returned to where Bee waited. "Looks empty, but stay alert." The cabin door was secured with a heavy padlock. Bee produced Belinda's key, which fit perfectly. The lock opened with a soft click, and Reese pushed the door open slowly, gun raised. The interior was dim and musty, with a single room containing a rough bed, a table, and a wood stove. But what immediately caught their attention were the items hanging from pegs on the walls: women's scarves, ribbons, a single shoe, a torn glove, trophies. "Dear God," Bee whispered, horror etching her features. Reese moved further into the cabin, checking for any immediate threats before holstering his weapon. "Look for anything that might identify the victims," he instructed grimly, "or link Wilson definitively to this place." They searched methodically. Under the bed, Bee found a wooden box containing personal items that must have belonged to the victims: a locket with a curl of auburn hair, a small prayer book with the name Margaret Winters inscribed inside, a tortoiseshell comb, a wedding band. "Evidence," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "But is it enough to convince the law?" Reese was examining the table, which held a ledger book. Opening it, he found what appeared to be a record of names, dates, and cryptic notations. "This might help," he said, showing it to Bee. "Looks like he documented his victims." A floorboard creaked behind them. They both whirled to find Fletcher Wilson standing in the doorway, a rifle pointed at Reese's chest. "Well, well," Wilson drawled, his thin lips curving in a cold smile. "What have we here? A trespasser and a nosy spinster." Reese shifted slightly, placing himself between Wilson and Bee. His gun was holstered, out of reach unless Wilson was momentarily distracted. "It's over, Wilson," he said calmly. "We know what you've done, to Belinda Jenkins, to the others." Wilson's smile didn't falter. "Do you now? And who's going to believe a man wanted for kidnapping, and a woman with an overactive imagination?" "The evidence speaks for itself," Bee replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the fear Reese could sense radiating from her. "The law will believe that." Wilson laughed, the sound chilling in its genuine amusement. The law. In these parts, money is the law, and Jenkins has plenty of it. He'll bury this story to protect his precious daughter's reputation, just like he did 2 years ago. Not this time, Reese said. Belinda's ready to tell the truth. Something flickered in Wilson's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or anger. She wouldn't dare. She already has, Bea lied smoothly. To us. And an assigned affidavit now in the hands of a lawyer in Dodge City. It was a bluff, but Wilson's confidence wavered visibly. The rifle barrel dipped slightly as he processed this information. Reese seized the moment, lunging forward with a speed born of desperate situations. He crashed into Wilson, driving him backward through the doorway and onto the dusty ground outside. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as they grappled. Wilson was strong, but Reese had survival at stake. They rolled across the ground, each fighting for dominance. Wilson landed a solid punch to Reese's jaw, momentarily stunning him. Using the advantage, Wilson scrambled for the fallen rifle. A shot rang out. Wilson froze, then slowly turned his head to see Bea standing in the cabin doorway, Reese's revolver steady in her hands. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice firm despite the slight tremble of her arms. Wilson's face contorted with rage. "You stupid bitch," he snarled, starting to rise. Bea fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from Wilson's hand. "The next one won't miss," she promised. Reese regained his feet, retrieving the rifle before securing Wilson's hands behind his back with a leather thong from his saddlebags. "You've got nothing on me," Wilson spat as Reese hauled him to his feet. "Nothing that'll stick." "We have Belinda's testimony," Reese replied. "And this cabin full of evidence. It's enough." They secured Wilson to his own horse, which they found hidden in a small gully nearby, and began the journey back to Dodge City. Bea carried the ledger book and box of personal items, evidence of Wilson's crimes. As they rode, Reese couldn't help glancing at Bea with newfound respect. "You handled that revolver like you knew what you were doing." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "My father believed women should know how to protect themselves. He taught me to shoot when I was 16. "I'm glad he did," Reese said sincerely. "You saved my life back there." "We saved each other," she replied, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away, her expression unreadable. The sun was setting by the time they reached Dodge City, painting the sky in dramatic oranges and purples. They drew curious stares as they rode down Front Street. Reese Everett, supposedly run out of town. Beatrice Jennings, the bookshop spinster, and Fletcher Wilson, trussed up like a holiday turkey. Word spread quickly. By the time they reached the marshal's office, a crowd had gathered. Marshal Masterson emerged, his expression a mixture of surprise and wariness as he recognized Reese. "What's the meaning of this, Everett?" he demanded, hand resting on his revolver. "This man," Reese replied, indicating Wilson, "is responsible for the disappearance of several women, including Molly Carson. We have evidence." Bea dismounted, carrying the box of personal items and the ledger. "Marshal, Fletcher Wilson kidnapped and assaulted Belinda Jenkins 2 years ago. He forced her to accuse Mr. Everett to protect herself and her father." Masterson's skeptical expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Jennings." "It's true." The voice came from the edge of the crowd. Belinda Jenkins pushed her way forward, her father close behind, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. "Belinda, don't," Calvin Jenkins began, reaching for his daughter's arm. She pulled away from him. "No, father, no more lies." She faced Masterson. "Fletcher Wilson kidnapped and assaulted me 2 years ago. Reese Everett saved my life. I accused him falsely because I was afraid of Wilson, of scandal, of my father's disappointment. Wilson lunged against his bonds, nearly falling from his horse. "She's lying. The girl's deranged." "Then how do you explain this?" Bee handed the ledger to Masterson. "Names, dates, locations, and these," she opened the box, revealing the personal items. "Belongings of missing women, all found in Wilson's cabin." A murmur ran through the crowd. Masterson flipped through the ledger, his expression hardening. "Get him down from there," he ordered his deputies, gesturing to Wilson. "Lock him up, and find Doc Ainsley. I want statements from everyone involved." As Wilson was dragged away, screaming threats and denials, Calvin Jenkins approached Reese. The rancher's face was a mask of conflicted emotions: shame, anger, regret. "Everett," he said stiffly, "it appears I've done you a grave injustice." Reese met his gaze steadily. "It's not me you need to apologize to," he replied, looking pointedly at Belinda, who stood trembling nearby. Jenkins flinched but nodded. "There will be reparations. For the damage to your reputation. For the time lost." "I don't want your money, Jenkins," Reese said. "Just the truth. Public and complete." "You'll have it," the rancher promised, before turning to his daughter and gently leading her away, his arm protectively around her shoulders. The crowd slowly dispersed as Masterson took Reese and Bee inside the marshal's office to provide detailed statements. It was well past midnight by the time they emerged, exhausted but relieved. Wilson was securely behind bars, and Masterson had sent telegrams to neighboring towns about the missing women. "What happens now?" Bee asked as they stood on the boardwalk outside the marshal's office. The street was nearly deserted, the saloons having closed for the night. Reese looked up at the stars scattered across the velvet sky. "Justice, hopefully, for Belinda, for all of them. And for you," Bee added softly. "Your name is cleared." He nodded, still processing this sudden reversal of fortune. After 2 years of being hunted, hated, his reputation was restored in a single evening. "Where will you go?" Bee's question was casual, but he could hear the underlying tension in her voice. Reese turned to face her. In the moonlight, her eyes were luminous, her expression carefully guarded. "I don't know," he admitted. "I hadn't thought beyond clearing my name." "You could stay," she suggested, her voice barely audible. "Dodge City might see you differently now." The implication hung between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Reese had wandered for years, never finding a place that felt like home. But standing there with Beatrice Jennings, something shifted inside him, a recognition that perhaps home wasn't a place at all, but a person. "I could," he agreed, studying her face. "If I had a reason." Bee met his gaze directly, her courage extending to matters of the heart as readily as it had to confronting a murderer. "You heard them curse your name in town," she said. "I promised I would bless it every day if what I suspected was true." Reese stepped closer, drawn by the quiet strength of this remarkable woman. "And now I know the truth." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "And I intend to keep my promise." In that moment, with the vastness of the Kansas night surrounding them and the future suddenly wide open before him, Reese Everett made the easiest decision of his life. He closed the distance between them and gently took her hands in his. "I'd like to hear that blessing," he said softly. "Every day, for as long as you're willing to give it." Bee's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "That might be a very long time, Mr. Everett." "I'm counting on it, Miss Jennings," he replied before lowering his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative with new possibility, then deepening with the promise of all that might follow. When they finally drew apart, something had changed irrevocably between them and within them both. The trial of Fletcher Wilson became the sensation of Ford County. Evidence mounted as authorities investigated the cabin at Ford's Crossing more thoroughly. discovering a shallow grave nearby containing the remains of 3 women, including Molly Carson. Wilson's ledger provided names and dates for 7 victims over a span of 3 years. Belinda Jenkins testified publicly, her voice growing stronger as she detailed Wilson's crimes against her. Other witnesses came forward, men who had seen Wilson with some of the missing women, a bartender who recalled Wilson's threatening behavior toward dance hall girls. Calvin Jenkins, true to his word, made a public statement exonerating Reese and acknowledging his own role in perpetuating the false accusations. The rancher's influence ensured that Wilson received no leniency from the court. On a crisp October morning in 1878, Fletcher Wilson was convicted of multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and murder. The judge sentenced him to hang, a verdict met with grim approval by the citizens of Dodge City. Throughout the proceedings, Reese remained in town, taking a position as security consultant for several businesses along Front Street. His reputation, far from being a liability, became an asset. The man who had helped bring Wilson to justice was welcomed where once he had been reviled. And always by his side was Beatrice Jennings, whose quiet determination had set everything in motion. Their courtship progressed under the approving eyes of the town that had once cursed Reese's name, but now spoke it with respect. On a perfect spring day in 1879, almost exactly a year after Reese had ridden back into Dodge City, they were married in the same church where they had confronted Belinda at the social. Belinda herself, healing slowly from her ordeal but growing stronger daily, served as B's maid of honor. "I believe we are gathered here today because of a promise," Reverend Clark said during the ceremony, smiling at the couple before him. "A promise to bless what others had cursed." B, radiant in a simple ivory gown, squeezed Reese's hand as they exchanged vows. The church was filled with the same townsfolk who had once shunned him, now witnessing the culmination of a love story that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. With Calvin Jenkins' financial backing as part of his reparations, Reese and B purchased the bookshop from her uncle, who had decided to retire to St. Louis. They expanded the business to include a small publishing venture, where B began producing her adventure novels, stories of justice and redemption set against the backdrop of the frontier. Their first child, a son they named James, was born in the winter of 1880. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Margaret, named after one of Wilson's victims whose family had never been found. The Everett family became fixtures in Dodge City, respected and beloved as the town transitioned from its wild cattle days to a more settled community. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Reese and B would often sit on the porch of their home behind the bookshop, watching the stars emerge over the Kansas prairie. "You ever miss it?" B asked one such evening, her head resting against his shoulder. "The wandering life?" Reese considered the question, his arm tightening around her. "No," he replied honestly. "I was looking for something all those years without knowing what it was. And now?" She prompted, looking up at him with the same intelligent eyes that had captivated him that first night in the Long Branch saloon. "Now I know I was looking for home," he said simply. "For you." B smiled, the expression still capable of taking his breath away after all their years together. "Then I'll keep blessing your name, Reese Everett," she whispered. "Every day, just as I promised." And she did, through all the years that followed, through joys and sorrows, through the growth of their family and business, through the changing landscape of the West they both loved. The cowboy whose name had once been cursed found redemption, not just in the clearing of his reputation, but in the heart of a woman brave enough to seek the truth and strong enough to stand by him when she found it. In Dodge City, The story of Reese and Beatrice Everett became something of a legend, how love and courage had transformed a manhunt into a homecoming, a curse into a blessing, and two separate paths into one shared journey that continued, strong and true, through all their days together.